The Galactic Empire had not been challenged in 312 standard cycles, and even the word challenge felt like an indulgence rather than a truth. Conquest had become procedural. Resistance was catalogued, analyzed, and dissolved with the same detached efficiency used to regulate trade routes or recalibrate orbital defenses. Empires were not built on passion, they were built on inevitability. The Great Council Chamber reflected that belief perfectly. It was a structure grown rather than built, layers of bioarchitected stone and living crystal spiraling upward into a ceiling so distant it faded into darkness. Light came not from lamps but from energy veins pulsing slowly through the walls, responding to the collective biosignatures of the species present. The more powerful the civilization, the stronger the glow around its seeding ring. The center floated the imperial sigil, a massive geometric construct that rotated with precise slowness, symbolizing balance, order, and unbreakable hierarchy. Beneath it, representatives of nearly 4,000 sentient species observed, calculated, and waited. This was not a place of debate anymore. That era had ended centuries ago. The Council no longer decided if something would happen, only how efficiently. The matter of the day was Earth. Most members of the Council regarded the name with mild disinterest. Humanity was filed under emerging civilizations, Class C, technologically competent but socially volatile, capable of producing impressive bursts of innovation followed by periods of internal collapse. They were known for paradoxes, cooperative yet combative, empathetic yet destructive, idealistic yet brutally pragmatic when threatened. The Empire had allowed them a diplomatic seat less out of respect and more out of habit. Granting observation status smoothed absorption later. The humans were expected to fracture on their own within a few centuries regardless. Empires had patience measured in millennia. When the human representative entered the chamber, there was no ripple of reaction. She walked alone and a guard followed her. No defensive drones hovered nearby. No ceremonial attire marked her as important. She wore neutral fabrics designed for comfort rather than intimidation, colored in subdued tones that blended easily with the ambient lighting. Her pace was unhurried, neither deferential nor confrontational. She moved like someone entering a familiar room rather than the most powerful political chamber in the known galaxy. Several council members noted this with mild curiosity. Others flagged it as a cultural misunderstanding. Humans often failed to grasp the symbolic language of power. She stopped at the designated position for non-core species envoys and waited an OBOW.NO proclamation to NO attempt to draw attention. The Imperial High Speaker, a massive being of layered chitin and luminescent membranes, initiated the session. Its voice resonated across the chamber without amplification, carried on harmonic frequencies that translated automatically for all present. The Empire acknowledged the arrival of Earth's representative. Formalities were observed. Protocols were recited. Historical summaries were displayed across the shared cognitive lattice. Humanity's rise from planetary conflict to limited interstellar travel unfolded in clean, compressed data streams. Wars, recoveries, breakthroughs, collapses, unity movements, fragmentation, reunification. A predictable pattern. The Empire had seen it thousands of times. What was less predictable was the human woman's expression as the summary played. She did not look impressed or defensive. She did not attempt to interject or correct the record. Her face remained composed, eyes attentive, posture relaxed but aligned. She absorbed the narrative of her species as if listening to an old story she already knew by heart. When the Imperial speaker concluded, the tone shifted subtly. The Empire expressed concern over Earth's rapid militarization, concern over unauthorized expansion beyond permitted trade corridors, concern over repeated violations of containment advisories issued for the protection of humanity and neighboring systems. The language was neutral, dispassionate, almost kind. The Empire did not threaten. It did not accuse. It simply explained consequences as one might explain gravity. The woman diplomat listened without interruption. When it was her turn to speak, she did not begin immediately. She paused, just long enough for several council members to register discomfort. Silence was unusual here. Most envoys rushed to fill it, afraid of appearing uncertain. She was not. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and unremarkable in tone. There was no attempt at rhetorical flourish. Earth acknowledged the Empire's concerns. Earth valued peace. Earth had no intention of destabilizing the region. She used language so carefully measured it almost disappeared into itself. Some members of the Council relaxed. This was familiar. Emerging civilizations always sounded like this at first. Gratitude, assurances, willingness to cooperate. But then she asked a question. It was not confrontational. It was framed as a request for clarification. She asked how many independent species the Empire currently governed by force rather than treaty. The chamber stilled, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The question was not forbidden, but it was unnecessary. The answer was publicly available. The Empire did not hide its conquests. The imperial speaker answered without hesitation. Thousands. The woman nodded slowly, as if confirming a calculation. She asked another question. How many of those species had once been offered protective oversight similar to what Earth was now receiving? There was a fractional pause before the answer came. Most. Still no reaction from her. No visible judgment. She asked a third question. How many of those species had voluntarily remained within the Empire once technological parity was achieved? The answer was fewer. The Council exchanged subtle signals. Data tags passed quietly between intelligence representatives. This line of questioning was unusual. Not dangerous, but inconvenient. Humans were known for asking inefficient questions. Emotional ones. Philosophical ones. The Empire responded anyway. The woman thanked them and said nothing more. No demands, no objections, no resistance. To the observers, it looked like compliance. After the session ended, internal analyses circulated rapidly. The consensus was reassuring. Earth's envoy was intelligent but ultimately constrained by her civilization's limitations. Curiosity did not equate to defiance. The questions were likely a domestic performance, gestures meant to placate Earth's internal factions resistant to integration. The recommendation was to proceed. Pressure would be applied gradually. Access limitations. Resource tariffs. Strategic restrictions framed as safety measures. Earth would adapt, as all others had. The woman diplomat returned to Earth without incident. Months passed. During that time, the Empire observed increasing human activity. Not militarily aggressive, but reorganized. Supply chains shifted. Civilian infrastructure expanded in patterns that did not align with economic projections. Communications traffic intensified, but encryption protocols remained within acceptable civilian ranges. Empire analysts flagged it as internal consolidation. Humans were prone to overreaction. Fear often drove inefficient resource allocation. The Empire adjusted containment measures slightly. Earth responded not with protest, but with silence. No appeals. No escalation. Another council session was convened. The woman returned, same attire, same posture, same calm. The first thing the Galactic Empire noticed was not destruction. It was delay. Convoys that should have arrived within precise temporal windows began showing fractional inconsistencies. A shipment rerouted around a nebular disturbance arrived minutes late. Another required recalibration upon exit from hyperspace. These were trivial irregularities, the kind that occurred thousands of times across an empire that spanned tens of thousands of systems. They were logged, adjusted for, and forgotten. Then the delays became patterns. Supply chains feeding frontier fleets began to thin, not catastrophically, but persistently. Replacement components arrived incomplete. Energy cells were depleted faster than projections allowed. Entire shipments vanished between mathematically stable jump points without emitting a single distress signal. The Empire did not panic. It had endured pirate confederations, spatial anomalies, even localized rebellions. Loss was part of expansion. What unsettled the analysts was the silence. Pirates announced themselves. Rebels wanted recognition. Natural disasters left signatures. These losses left nothing. Ships did not explode. They did not scatter debris. They did not transmit fear. They simply failed to exist after a certain point in transit, as though reality itself had forgotten them. The Empire's predictive intelligences were tasked with recalculating risk models. They failed, not catastrophically, not obviously. Their projections continued to function within acceptable margins, until they didn't. Small discrepancies accumulated. Probabilities drifted. Outcomes that should have been statistically impossible began occurring with uncomfortable frequency. Entire logistics corridors showed rising entropy with no identifiable cause. The Empire responded as it always had. IT tightened control, new protocols were issued. Trade routes were restricted. Military escorts were increased. Autonomous oversight systems were granted broader authority. And still, the losses continued. Escorts vanished alongside the ships they were meant to protect. Oversight systems reported normal operations right up until they ceased transmitting. No enemy declared responsibility. No demands were made. The Empire began to feel something it had not felt in millennia, uncertainty. On Earth, humanity watched. They had learned early that the Empire's strength lay not in its weapons but in its assumptions. Imperial doctrine depended on predictability, on systems that optimized efficiency and minimized deviation. It believed intelligence could model everything worth fearing. It believed that with enough data, the future could be made obedient. Humans had never believed that. They had lived their entire existence inside chaos. Their history was not a curve toward stability but a series of near extinctions narrowly avoided through improvisation, sacrifice, and stubborn refusal to stop. They did not optimize for peace. They optimized for survival. When the Empire came, humanity learned quickly what could not be fought directly. So they chose not to fight directly. They dismantled their digital footprint piece by piece, not erasing it but corrupting it with contradiction. Old records were altered subtly, introducing false patterns that imperial intelligences would dutifully incorporate. Human cultural remnants were seeded across black markets and fringe networks, each fragment telling a slightly different story of humanity's fate: extinct, enslaved, assimilated, irrelevant. The Empire consumed these stories greedily. IT loved closure. Meanwhile, beneath Earth's surface, human engineers worked without automation. Human mathematicians abandoned elegant proofs and returned to brute force iteration. Human strategists studied imperial logistics not as military targets but as ecosystems. They mapped dependencies, redundancies, habits formed over centuries of unchallenged dominance. They learned where the Empire could not adapt quickly. Hyperspace was the key. Imperial faster-than-light travel relied on stable corridors calculated by ancient equations refined over ages. These corridors were considered immutable, governed by constants the Empire treated as laws. Humans discovered they were not laws. They were preferences. By introducing minuscule disruptions, gravitational echoes seeded far from detection thresholds, timing offsets smaller than standard error margins, humans learned to nudge hyperspace just enough to cause catastrophic misalignment. A ship entering a corridor calculated to be safe would not explode. It would simply never arrive where it intended. Sometimes it emerged inside stellar matter. Sometimes between dimensions where matter could not persist. Sometimes nowhere at all. The beauty of it was deniability. From the Empire's perspective, nothing was wrong with hyperspace. Their models said so. Their equations remained correct within acceptable tolerances. Only reality disagreed. As losses mounted, imperial governors along the outer sectors began making independent decisions. Fleets were pulled back to protect core worlds. Resource worlds were abandoned as unprofitable. Trade slowed. Fear crept into administrative language, subtle but undeniable. Where once reports spoke of expected attrition, they now spoke of unexplained anomalies. The word enemy was still not used. That changed when a deep core monitoring array intercepted a signal it could not classify. It did not originate from a ship. It did not originate from a planet. It appeared simultaneously across multiple systems, embedded in background radiation so faint it bordered on theoretical. The signal was old, years old, yet newly decoded, as if it had been waiting for the right moment to be understood. It was human. The message was not addressed to any individual authority. It did not threaten. It did not boast. It did not explain the mechanism of the losses or claim credit for them. It stated a fact. This was your final warning. Imperial analysts traced the timestamp and felt something akin to disbelief. The message had been sent shortly after Earth's occupation began, buried so deeply in cosmic noise that no standard system would have noticed it. Humanity had not reacted to conquest. It had planned during it. For the first time, the Empire reclassified Earth. Too late, attempts were made to reassert control over the Sol system. Fleets were redirected. Orders were issued to extract resources more aggressively, to flush out remaining human populations, to force engagement. The fleets never arrived one by one. Imperial worlds along key supply arteries began experiencing shortages. Energy grids fluctuated. Food synthesis slowed. Medical fabrication units reported material deficits. The Empire's vast population had never known scarcity. It had engineered it out of existence. Now, scarcity returned not as famine but as inconvenience at first, then as disruption. Civilizations accustomed to abundance reacted poorly. Riots broke out on worlds that had never experienced internal unrest. Local authorities blamed one another. Requests for aid overwhelmed central command. The Empire tried to prioritize responses, but its models no longer agreed on what mattered most. Every solution created new problems elsewhere, and through it all, humanity remained silent and fleets bearing human insignia appeared. No declarations of war were issued. No calls for surrender echoed through the void. The Empire found itself fighting a war without a battlefield, against an enemy that refused to be seen. Eventually, desperation overrode doctrine that an Imperial Council authorized a direct message to Earth. The transmission was formal, carefully worded, stripped of arrogance. It acknowledged unexpected losses. It proposed negotiation. It offered concessions, autonomy, resource rights, even partial withdrawal, in exchange for an explanation. The message reached Earth, humanity listened, and then, for the first time since the invasion, Earth spoke back. The signal was broadcast on every frequency the Empire used, mirrored across relay networks, impossible to block without severing the Empire's own communications. It was not encrypted. It did not hide. It did not need to. The message began with history. T spoke of a species born fragile on a hostile world, shaped by extinction events and internal conflict. It spoke of mistakes made and lessons learned too late, again and again. It spoke of how humans had learned that survival was not about strength but about adaptation. T explained why Earth had warned them. Because humans understood empires. They had built them. They had watched them collapse. The message described the Empire's greatest vulnerability not as a flaw but as a philosophy. It relied on control, on optimization, on the belief that order could be imposed indefinitely. Humans knew better. Order always decayed. Systems always failed. And those who planned only for efficiency died when inefficiency was introduced deliberately. The message did not threaten annihilation. It promised consequence. Humanity did not intend to conquer the Empire. It did not need to. It had already severed the arteries that fed imperial dominance. It would continue doing so, patiently, selectively, until the Empire could no longer project power beyond its own borders. Then came the final choice. The Empire could withdraw from Earth entirely, dismantle its claim to the Sol system, and accept permanent exclusion from human space. In return, humanity would cease its interference. Hyperspace would stabilize. Supply chains would recover. The Empire would survive, diminished but intact. Or it could refuse. If it refused, humanity would do nothing different. That was the threat. Silence followed the broadcast, but this time it belonged to the Empire, councils argued. Fleets stood idle, afraid to move. Governors pleaded for relief as shortages worsened. The Empire had been built on the assumption that no force could challenge it without matching its scale. Humanity had proven that assumption obsolete. Eventually, the order was given. Imperial forces withdrew from Earth's orbit. Oversight stations were dismantled. Claims on the Sol system were rescinded quietly, without ceremony. The Empire did not announce defeat. It framed the decision as strategic realignment. Humanity did not correct the record. When the last Imperial vessel departed Earth's skies, humanity did not cheer. There were no celebrations broadcast into space. There was only relief and resolve. Earth remained dark to the galaxy. The Empire survived, but it was no longer the same. Expansion slowed. Borders hardened. Fear replaced confidence. Across the stars, other civilizations took note of what had happened to the empire that thought itself eternal. They learned a new rule: never ignore a warning from a species that knows how to lose. Because humans had learned something else as well. When the universe corners them, they do not fight to win. They fight to make sure it never happens again.